The bright lights of Concordia Prime space station hurt Admiral Marcus Kane's eyes as he walked through the main corridor. Today was supposed to be a good day. After 3 long years of fighting, the war was finally over. The Galactic Federation had won against the Zephyrian Empire, and now both sides would sign papers to make peace official. Marcus looked out through the large windows at the ships floating in space around the station. Federation vessels from dozens of different worlds hung in the darkness like metal stars. Each ship represented a different alien race that had fought together against the Zephyrians. Some looked like giant tubes, others like crystal formations, and a few resembled organic creatures more than machines. Among them, Marcus could see the human ships. They were smaller than most of the alien vessels, painted in simple gray and blue colors. The humans had joined this war late, when their planet Earth finally became part of the Federation. They had fought hard, but always under alien commanders, who told them where to go and what to do. Captain Lisa Brooks stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, one of the last human ships still in working condition. She watched the ceremony preparations through her ship's cameras. Lisa had short brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too much death in the past 3 years. Her crew was down to half its original size, and her ship bore scars from countless battles. "Captain," said Lieutenant Danny Clark from his position at the communication station, "we're getting the final head count from all human vessels. Looks like we lost another transport ship yesterday." Lisa nodded slowly. The humans had paid a heavy price in this war. They had been given the most dangerous jobs, sent to fight in places where other species refused to go. Many of her friends were dead now, floating in space around distant worlds that most humans had never heard of. The ceremony hall of Concordia Prime was huge, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Representatives from every federation, species, sat in rows of seats that curved around a central platform. The air smelled strange, a mixture of different atmospheres that allowed all the alien races to breathe comfortably. Chancellor Vex, the tall, pale leader of the Federation, stepped up to the speaking platform. His species, the Alterans, looked almost human except for their pure white skin and completely black eyes. He had been the one to guide the Federation through the darkest days of the war. "Today," Chancellor Vex said in his smooth voice, "we gather to witness the end of the bloodiest conflict our galaxy has known. The Zephyrian Empire has agreed to surrender all military operations and accept Federation terms for peace." In the back of the hall, War Queen Zathra of the Zephyrians sat with her small group of advisors. The Zephyrians looked like giant insects, with hard shells covering their bodies and multiple arms that moved constantly. Zathra's shell was darker than the others, marked with scars from many battles. Her compound eyes showed no emotion as she listened to the ceremony. Lisa watched from her ship as the documents were signed. Each species had their own way of marking agreements. Some used electronic signatures, others pressed their claws into special clay, and a few simply touched the documents with their minds. When it came time for the human representative to sign, Admiral Kane used an old-fashioned pen with blue ink. Far away from Concordia Prime, In the empty space between star systems, another human ship moved through the darkness. The Nightfall was different from other vessels. It was painted completely black and covered with special materials that made it nearly invisible to most sensors. This ship had been traveling for almost 2 years, moving toward what its crew thought was the main battle zone of the war. Colonel Jake Morrison sat in the captain's chair, studying star charts on his screen. Jake was a big man with gray hair and hands marked by old scars. He had been a soldier for 20 years, fighting in conflicts across human space before Earth joined the Federation. His team was special, chosen from the best fighters humanity had ever produced. "Colonel," said Sergeant Amy Rodriguez from her station. Amy was small but dangerous, an expert with explosives who could destroy a building or crack open a safe with equal skill. "We're picking up old radio signals from the front lines. Sounds like our people are getting beaten pretty bad." Lieutenant Chris Palmer looked up from his tactical displays. Chris was thin and quiet, but his mind worked like a computer when it came to military strategy. "The last clear signals we got were 6 months ago. Since then, mostly just emergency calls and distress signals." Lieutenant Nina Walsh, their cyber warfare specialist, typed rapidly on her keyboard. Nina had bright red hair and green eyes that seemed to glow when she worked with computers. "I'm trying to break through the communication blackout, but someone is jamming most frequencies. The Federation must be in real trouble." Jake nodded grimly. His team had been sent on a special mission 2 years ago when the war was going badly for the Federation. Their job was to strike deep behind enemy lines, hitting targets that regular forces could not reach. They had been traveling in complete radio silence, following orders to maintain secrecy until they reached their target zone. "How long until we reach Zephyrian space?" Jake asked. Chris checked his calculations. 18 hours, Colonel. We'll drop out of hyperspace at the edge of their territory, just like the mission plan says. Jake looked at his team, these 3 people who had followed him across the galaxy. They were the best at what they did, trained to fight in ways that most people could not imagine. The Shadow Division had been Earth's secret weapon, a unit so effective that even their own government was sometimes afraid of what they could do. Back on Concordia Prime, the ceremony was ending. The crowd of aliens began to leave the hall, talking excitedly about the peace that would finally let them rebuild their worlds. Admiral Kane walked slowly back to his ship, feeling older than his 50 years. Captain Brooks received a message on her personal communicator. It was from Earth Command, marked with the highest security codes. As she read it, her face went pale. "Danny," she called to her communications officer. "Send a priority message to Admiral Kane. Tell him we have a problem, a big problem." The message was simple but terrifying. Shadow Division still active. Last known position, deep space, heading for Zephyrian territory. No contact for 22 months. Assume mission still in progress. In the ceremony hall, War Queen Zathra signed the final peace document with one of her sharp claws. The war was over. Her people were defeated, and now they would have to rebuild. She looked forward to a time when her species could heal from the terrible wounds of the past 3 years. None of them knew that humanity's most dangerous weapon was about to arrive in Zephyrian space, believing the war was still raging and that desperate times called for desperate measures. The peace everyone celebrated was about to be tested by warriors who knew only how to fight and who thought they were humanity's last hope. The Nightfall continued its journey through hyperspace, carrying death toward a galaxy that thought the killing was finally over. The Nightfall dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zephyrian territory with barely a whisper. The black ship's sensors immediately began scanning for enemy forces, expecting to find a war zone filled with burning ships and desperate battles. Instead, Colonel Jake Morrison and his team found something much more confusing. "This doesn't make sense," said Lieutenant Chris Palmer, staring at his tactical screen. "There are Zephyrian ships out there, but they're not fighting. They're just moving around normally." Sergeant Amy Rodriguez checked her weapon systems twice before speaking. "Maybe it's a trap. The bugs might be pretending everything is normal to catch us off guard." Lieutenant Nina Walsh was deep in her computer networks, trying to break into Zephyrian communications. Her fingers moved across the keyboard like she was playing a piano. "I'm picking up their radio chatter. Most of it sounds like regular stuff. Supply runs, patrol reports, maintenance schedules, nothing about active combat." Jake frowned as he looked at the data his team was collecting. Something was very wrong here. According to their last briefing 2 years ago, this sector should have been the center of the heaviest fighting. Instead, it looked almost peaceful. "Maybe the Federation pushed them back," Chris suggested. "Could be we're looking at the rear areas now." "Then where are our ships?" Amy asked. "I don't see any Federation forces anywhere." Nina suddenly went very still, her eyes fixed on her screen. "Colonel, I think you need to see this. I just intercepted a Zephyrian communication that mentions something about post-war reconstruction efforts." Jake felt his stomach drop. "Post-war? Run that again." Nina played the intercepted message through the ship's speakers. The alien voices were translated by their computer into flat, mechanical English. "Reconstruction Team 7, proceed to Mining Station Kepler 12 for damage assessment. Remember, all weapons must remain powered down as per the peace treaty requirements, the Kosh." Bridge went completely silent. Jake stared at the speaker like it had just told him his entire family was dead. In a way, it had done something even worse. "Peace treaty?" Amy whispered. "What peace treaty?" Chris was already running calculations on his computer. "If there's been a peace treaty, and we've been traveling for almost 2 years, the war is over," Jake finished. "The war is over and nobody told us." Far away on Concordia Prime, Captain Lisa Brooks was having the worst day of her military career. She sat in Admiral Kane's office, looking at files that made her hands shake. The Shadow Division wasn't just any military unit. They were the most dangerous soldiers Earth had ever produced, trained to operate completely independently behind enemy lines. "Tell me again what their last orders were," Admiral Kane said. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the past hour. Lisa read from the classified file. "Operation Deep Strike. Penetrate Zephyrian core territory and conduct sabotage operations against military and industrial targets. No communication with command unless absolutely necessary. Mission duration: indefinite." Admiral Kane put his head in his hands. "And they've been out of contact for 22 months. Sir, There's more, Lisa said quietly. According to this file, the Shadow Division was equipped with experimental weapons, things that were never supposed to be used unless the Federation was about to lose the war completely. What kind of weapons? Lisa looked at the file again. Quantum explosives that can destroy entire space stations. Biological weapons designed specifically to target Zephyrian physiology. Cyber warfare tools that can take control of an entire planet's computer networks. Admiral Kane stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the peaceful ships surrounding Concordia Prime. And now they're heading into Zephyrian space, thinking they're going to save humanity from defeat. On the nightfall, Jake was trying to make sense of the situation. His team had gathered in the main briefing room, all of them struggling to understand what they had learned. Maybe the intelligence is wrong, Amy said. Maybe the bugs are lying about the peace treaty to make us lower our guard. No, Nina said, shaking her head. I've been monitoring their communications for 6 hours now. It's all consistent. Ship movements, supply schedules, civilian traffic. This isn't what a military force looks like. This is what a civilization looks like when it's trying to rebuild after a war. Chris pulled up a star chart on the main screen. If the war really is over, we need to abort the mission and return to Federation space immediately. Jake sat quietly for a long moment thinking about everything they had discovered. Finally, he spoke. Even if the war is over, we still don't know what kind of peace this is. The Federation might have surrendered. Humanity might be slaves now, and this peace might just be the Zephyrians deciding not to kill us all at once. Colonel, Nina said carefully, I could try to contact Federation Command. Find out what really happened. No, Jake said firmly. If we break radio silence now, we give away our position. And if the Federation has been compromised, we might be leading the enemy right to us. Amy leaned forward. So what do we do? Jake looked at each of his team members. These 3 people had followed him across the galaxy, trusting him to lead them through the most dangerous mission any human had ever attempted. Now he had to make a decision that could change everything. We continue the mission, he said finally, but we gather intelligence first. We need to know what this peace treaty really means, and whether humanity is truly safe. Back on Concordia Prime, Lisa Brooks was preparing for the most important mission of her career. Admiral Kane had given her command of a small fleet of fast ships with one goal: find the Shadow Division before they accidentally started a new war. Captain, said Lieutenant Danny Clark, we've received clearance from the Federation Council. We can enter Zephyrian space under the search and rescue provisions of the peace treaty. Lisa nodded, but she wasn't feeling confident. Zephyrian space was huge, and the Shadow Division's ship was designed to be invisible. Finding them would be like looking for a single black stone in a dark ocean. How long until we reach the border? She asked. 36 hours at maximum speed. Lisa hoped that would be fast enough. The Shadow Division had been traveling toward Zephyrian space for almost 2 years. They had to be getting close to their target area by now. On the nightfall, Nina had managed to hack into a Zephyrian data network. What she found made everyone on the bridge go very quiet. Colonel, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I've got access to their military databases. The Zephyrians didn't just lose this war, they lost it badly. Their fleet is down to less than 30% of its original strength. Their industrial capacity is almost completely destroyed. Show me, Jake said. Nina put the data on the main screen. Charts and graphs showed the complete devastation of the Zephyrian Empire. Billions of their people were dead. Dozens of their worlds were uninhabitable. Their military was barely functional. If this information is accurate, Chris said slowly, then the Zephyrians aren't a threat to anyone anymore. They're just trying to survive. Jake stared at the data for a long time. Everything he thought he knew about the war was wrong. The Federation hadn't been losing. Humanity hadn't been in desperate danger. The war had been won so completely that the enemy was broken beyond repair. "Colonel," Amy said quietly, "what if the Federation didn't tell us the war was over because they wanted us to keep fighting? What if they wanted us to finish off the Zephyrians completely?" It was a terrible thought, but Jake couldn't dismiss it. The Shadow Division had been sent on a mission to destroy Zephyrian military and industrial targets. If the Zephyrians were already defeated, then their mission had changed from military necessity to simple extermination. "We need more information," Jake said finally. "Nina, can you find out more about this peace treaty? I want to know exactly what terms the Zephyrians agreed to." As Nina worked, Jake looked out at the stars and wondered what kind of people they had become. The Shadow Division had been created to protect humanity, but now they might be nothing more than killers arriving too late to a war that was already over. The question was, what would they do with that knowledge? Colonel Jake Morrison made his decision 3 hours before dawn on the nightfall. His team had spent the entire night studying Zephyrian communications and military data, and what they found made Jake's blood run cold. The peace treaty wasn't just an end to the war. It was a complete surrender that left the Zephyrians defenseless. The Federation could wipe them out completely whenever they wanted, Lieutenant Chris Palmer said, pointing at the tactical displays. The Zephyrians have almost no military left. Most of their remaining ships are just transports and supply vessels. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez checked her equipment one more time. "So why haven't they finished the job?" Lieutenant Nina Walsh looked up from her computer screens. "Maybe because they want the Zephyrians alive for some reason. Cheap labor, maybe, or they just like having someone to kick around." Jake studied the star charts that showed Zephyrian territory. Their original mission had been to strike at military targets deep behind enemy lines. But if the enemy was already beaten, then hitting those targets would just be murder. "Colonel," Chris said quietly, "I've been thinking about our orders. Command sent us out here with experimental weapons and told us to operate independently. Maybe they always planned for us to arrive after the war was over." "You think they wanted us to finish off the Zephyrians?" Amy asked. "Think about it," Chris continued. "If the Federation officially ordered the complete destruction of the Zephyrian Empire, it would look bad to other species. But if a rogue human unit did it while following old orders, then the Federation could claim they had nothing to do with it." Jake felt sick. The idea that his own command might have sent them out here to commit genocide was almost too terrible to believe. But it made a horrible kind of sense. There's only one way to find out what's really going on, Jake said finally. We stick to the mission plan, but we gather our own intelligence first. If the Zephyrians are really just trying to rebuild, then we'll know the Federation lied to us. Nina nodded. I've identified a target. There's a Zephyrian industrial facility on Kepler-7. According to their communications, it's supposed to be a weapons factory. But the energy readings I'm getting suggest it's actually producing civilian goods. How far? Jake asked. 6 hours at stealth speed. Jake looked at his team. Amy was cleaning her weapons with the careful attention of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Chris was studying tactical maps, planning approach routes and escape plans. Nina was deep in her computers, gathering every piece of information she could find. These were the best soldiers humanity had ever produced. They could infiltrate any target, destroy any objective, and disappear without a trace. But now Jake had to decide whether to use those skills to commit what might be mass murder. On Concordia Prime, Captain Lisa Brooks was racing against time. Her small fleet had entered Zephyrian space 12 hours ago, following the most likely course the Shadow Division would have taken. But space was huge, and the nightfall was designed to be invisible. "Captain," said Lieutenant Danny Clark from the communications station, "we're getting reports from Zephyrian monitoring stations. They've detected some unusual sensor readings in the outer systems." "What kind of readings?" "Brief contacts that disappeared almost immediately." "Could be nothing, but the patterns match what we'd expect from a stealth ship." Lisa felt her heart race. "How old are these contacts?" "The most recent was 4 hours ago, near the Kepler system." Lisa turned to her navigation officer. "Set course for Kepler-7, maximum speed, and send a priority message to Admiral Kane. Tell him we might have found them." The nightfall approached Kepler-7 like a shadow moving across the face of the moon. Jake and his team had spent hours studying the planet's defenses, and what they found was both surprising and disturbing. "The defense systems are ancient," Amy reported. "Most of them look like they haven't been maintained in months. I could probably disable the whole network with a few well-placed charges." "Population?" Jake asked. Chris checked his scanners. "About 2 million Zephyrians, spread across 3 major cities. The industrial complex we're targeting is outside the main population center, but there are still about 50,000 civilians within 5 kilometers. Nina had been monitoring the planet's communications for the past hour. "Colonel, I'm not picking up any military chatter at all. The communications I'm seeing are mostly about production quotas for farming equipment and medical supplies." "Farming equipment?" Jake asked. "According to what I'm reading, this facility is producing agricultural machinery to help rebuild damaged farm worlds. There's also a medical supply division that's making basic medicines." Jake stared at the planet below them. This wasn't what he had expected to find. The intelligence reports from 2 years ago had described Kepler-7 as a major weapons production center, one of the most important military targets in Zephyrian space. "Maybe they converted the facility after the war ended," Amy suggested, "turned weapons factories into civilian production." "Or maybe," Chris said quietly, "our intelligence was wrong from the beginning." That was the possibility Jake didn't want to think about. If the Federation had given them false intelligence about Zephyrian military targets, then the Shadow Division might have been sent out here to attack civilians from the very beginning. We need to get closer, Jake decided. Nina, can you hack into the facility's computers? Give me an hour with their network and I'll know everything about that place. The Nightfall moved into the planet's upper atmosphere, using advanced stealth technology to avoid detection. Jake watched through the ship's cameras as they passed over Zephyrian cities. The buildings looked damaged, many of them showing signs of bombing or artillery strikes. But there were also signs of repair work, new construction, and normal civilian activity. Colonel, Nina called from her station. I'm in their network. This place definitely isn't a weapons factory anymore. They're producing medical equipment, farming tools, and construction materials. The work shifts are staffed mostly by civilians, including a lot of young Zephyrians who are probably too young to have fought in the war. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Any military presence? A few security guards, but they're armed with basic non-lethal weapons. Nothing that could threaten a military force. Amy looked up from her weapons console. Colonel, if we hit this target with the weapons we brought, we'll kill thousands of civilians who are just trying to rebuild their lives. Jake nodded slowly. The decision was becoming clear, even though it went against everything he had been trained to do. His orders were to destroy this facility, but his orders had been based on information that was either wrong or deliberately false. "We abort," he said finally. "This isn't a military target. It's a civilian facility." Chris looked relieved. "So we head back to Federation space?" "Not yet," Jake said. "We need to check other targets on our list. If this facility was misidentified, maybe others were too. Nina was already pulling up their mission data. The next target is a communications center on Nexus 9. Intelligence said it was coordinating Zephyrian military operations." "How far?" 2 days at stealth speed. As the Nightfall moved away from Kepler 7, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong with their mission. The Shadow Division had been sent to destroy what they thought were military targets, but so far everything they had found suggested that the war was truly over, and the Zephyrians were just trying to survive. Meanwhile, Captain Brooks and her fleet were closing in on the Kepler system. Her sensors had detected the faint energy signature that might have been left by the Nightfall's passage. "Captain," Danny reported, "we're picking up increased communication traffic from Kepler 7. Something has them worried down there." "What kind of communications?" "Reports of unusual sensor readings in their upper atmosphere. They're asking their defense network to run full scans." Lisa realized that the Shadow Division had been there, probably scouting the planet as a potential target. She was getting closer, but she might already be too late. "Send a message to the Zephyrian authorities on Kepler 7, she ordered. "Tell them we're Federation ships conducting a search and rescue operation. Warn them that there might be a rogue human unit in their space." "Captain," Danny said carefully, "are you sure we should warn them? If the Shadow Division is planning to attack?" "Then maybe a warning will save lives," Lisa finished. "These people aren't our enemies anymore, Danny. They're just trying to rebuild after a war that cost them everything." As her ships raced toward Kepler 7, Lisa could only hope that Colonel Morrison and his team would remember that they were supposed to be the good guys. The Zephyrian defense fleet that assembled near Nexus 9 was the largest military force they had managed to gather since the war ended. War Queen Zathra herself had ordered every available ship to hunt for the mysterious attackers who had been spotted near several worlds. Commander Vex Ka stood on the bridge of the Zephyrian heavy cruiser Razor's Edge, one of the few real warships the Empire had left. His 4 arms moved constantly as he coordinated the search pattern, while his compound eyes tracked multiple displays at once. "Search Group 3, report," he clicked in the Zephyrian language. "Nothing in Sector 7, Commander. These humans are like shadows. We detect them for a moment, then they vanish completely." Vex Ka's mandibles clicked together in frustration. The reports from Kepler 7 had been terrifying. Someone had penetrated their atmosphere completely undetected, studied their industrial facilities for hours, and then disappeared without a trace. The only reason they knew anything had happened was because of some very faint energy readings that their most sensitive equipment had barely picked up. "Commander," called his communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the Federation ship UFS Liberty. They say they're conducting a search and rescue operation. Put them through." Captain Lisa Brooks appeared on the main screen, her tired face showing the strain of the past few days. "Commander Vex Ka, I'm Captain Brooks of the Federation Fleet. We're tracking a rogue human military unit that may be operating in your space." "A rogue unit?" Vex Ka's translator made his voice sound flat and mechanical. "Are you saying the Federation has lost control of its own forces?" Lisa felt heat rise in her cheeks. This was exactly the kind of diplomatic nightmare that Admiral Kane had warned her about. "The unit in question has been out of communication for over 2 years. They don't know the war has ended." "And what are their capabilities?" Lisa hesitated. How could she explain that the Shadow Division was equipped with enough firepower to destroy entire planets? They're highly trained special forces with advanced weapons. If they believe the war is still ongoing, they may attempt to attack what they think are military targets. Vex Ka's 4 arms stopped moving for a moment, a sign of deep concern among his species. "Captain Brooks, do you realize what you're telling me? You're saying that human soldiers with advanced weapons are loose in our space, believing they're still at war with us?" "Yes," Lisa said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm saying." 2 days away, the Nightfall was approaching Nexus 9 with the same careful stealth they had used at Kepler 7. Colonel Jake Morrison and his team had spent the travel time studying intelligence reports about their target, and once again, they were finding disturbing inconsistencies. "According to our files," Lieutenant Chris Palmer said, "this communication center coordinates all Zephyrian military operations in 3 star systems. But the signal traffic I'm monitoring doesn't match that description at all." Lieutenant Nina Walsh looked up from her computer station. "I've been analyzing their transmissions for 6 hours now. Most of the traffic is civilian communications, family messages, business transactions, entertainment broadcasts. There's some government communication, but it's mostly about refugee relocation and reconstruction efforts." Sergeant Amy Rodriguez was studying the tactical layout of the facility. "The building design doesn't look right for a military command center either. Too many windows, too much civilian access. This looks more like a regular communication hub. Jake frowned as he looked at the data his team had collected. Just like at Kepler-7, their target didn't match the intelligence they had been given. Either the Zephyrians had made major changes after the war ended, or the Federation had given them false information from the beginning. Maybe we should try to contact Federation Command, Chris suggested. Get an update on our mission parameters. No, Jake said firmly. If we break radio silence, we compromise our position. And if our own command sent us out here with false intelligence, then we can't trust anything they tell us now. Nina suddenly went very still, her eyes fixed on her screen. Colonel, I think you need to see this. I just intercepted a communication between the Zephyrian Defense Forces and a Federation ship. She put the transmission on the main speakers. Captain Brooks' voice filled the bridge of the Nightfall, warning the Zephyrians about a rogue human unit operating in their space. The bridge went completely silent. Jake stared at the speaker as if it had just announced the end of the world. They're hunting us, Amy said quietly. But why? Chris asked. If they wanted us to abort the mission, they could have sent us updated orders. Nina was already working on her computer, trying to find more information about the Federation ships that had entered Zephyrian space. I'm picking up 3 Federation vessels moving in a search pattern. They're specifically looking for stealth signatures. Jake felt a cold anger building in his chest. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and he didn't like the picture. They were forming. They sent us out here to do something they didn't want to take official responsibility for. Now that we're getting close to our targets, they're sending people to stop us. Or maybe, Chris said carefully, they're trying to stop us because they realized the intelligence was wrong. Either way, Amy said, we're on our own now. Jake looked at his team, these 3 people who had followed him across the galaxy. They were the best at what they did, but now they were being hunted by their own people while operating in enemy space with orders that might be based on lies. What do you want to do, Colonel? Nina asked. Jake thought about their options. They could try to contact Captain Brooks and surrender, but that would mean trusting the same Federation that had sent them out here in the first place. They could continue with their mission, but attacking civilian targets would make them nothing more than terrorists. Or they could try to find out the truth about what was really happening. We're going to investigate this communication center, Jake decided. But we're not going to attack it. We're going to infiltrate it and find out what's really going on. That's a big risk, Colonel, Amy warned. If we get caught inside a Zephyrian facility, then we'll fight our way out, Jake said. But I need to know whether we're soldiers following legitimate orders or killers being used by people who lied to us. The Nightfall moved closer to Nexus 9, its stealth systems hiding it from the Zephyrian search ships that were combing the system. Jake watched the planet grow larger on their screens, knowing that this decision would change everything. On the surface of Nexus 9, the communications center looked like exactly what it was, a civilian facility that handled normal communications for several star systems. The building was made of the same organic-looking material that all Zephyrian structures used, with curves and flowing lines that seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built. Inside the facility, hundreds of Zephyrian workers went about, their daily routines. Most of them were young, too young to have fought in the war. They processed communication requests, maintained the equipment, and handled the thousands of small tasks that kept a civilization running. None of them knew that one of the most dangerous military units in human space was about to infiltrate their workplace. Captain Brooks was getting closer to Nexus 9, but she knew she was running out of time. The Zephyrian Defense Forces were getting more aggressive in their search patterns, and sooner or later, they were going to find the Shadow Division. Captain, Lieutenant Danny Clark reported, "We're receiving a priority message from Admiral Kane. The Federation Council is demanding answers about the rogue human unit." Lisa rubbed her tired eyes. "What kind of answers?" "They want to know how a human military unit could operate independently for 2 years without any oversight. Some of the council members are suggesting that Earth deliberately sent the Shadow Division to finish off the Zephyrians." Lisa felt her stomach drop. If the Federation Council started to believe that Earth was acting in bad faith, it could destroy the alliance that had protected human colonies for years. "Send a reply to Admiral Kane," she said. "Tell him we're closing in on the Shadow Division's position. And tell him that if he has any influence with the Council, now would be a good time to use it." As the various forces converged on Nexus 9, none of them knew that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of the Shadow Division, but the future relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. The infiltration of the Nexus 9 Communications Center began at midnight local time. Colonel Jake Morrison and Sergeant Amy Rodriguez moved through the facility's ventilation system like ghosts, their advanced suits making them nearly invisible to Zephyrian sensors. Lieutenant Nina Walsh remained on the Nightfall, providing electronic support and monitoring communications. Jake had done hundreds of infiltrations during his military career, but this one felt different. Instead of preparing to destroy enemy equipment, he was looking for evidence of what this facility really did. Every piece of information they gathered would help him decide whether their mission was legitimate or if they had been sent to commit war crimes. "Colonel," Amy whispered. Through her helmet communicator, "I'm seeing the main computer core. Security is lighter than expected for a military facility." "Because it's not a military facility," Jake replied. "It's exactly what it looks like. A civilian communication hub." They dropped down from the ventilation shaft into a corridor lined with the flowing, organic architecture that the Zephyrians preferred. The walls seemed to pulse gently with bioluminescent lighting, creating patterns that were beautiful even to human eyes. Jake activated his suit's recording systems as they moved through the facility. Whatever they found here would need to be documented. The evidence might be the only thing that could prove their innocence if they were ever put on trial for their actions. In the main communications center, dozens of Zephyrian workers sat at control stations, managing the flow of messages across 3 star systems. Most of them were young adults, their shells still bright and unmarked by the scars of war. They worked quietly, processing routine communications with the focused attention of people who took pride in their jobs. Amy watched them through her suit's cameras. "Colonel, these aren't soldiers. They're just people. Kids, mostly." Jake felt something heavy settle in his chest. During the war, he had convinced himself that all Zephyrians were enemies, insectoid monsters who threatened human survival. But looking at these young workers, he realized they were just trying to make a living in a galaxy that had been torn apart by violence. Meanwhile, on the Nightfall, Nina was deep in the facility's computer networks. What she found there made her hands shake as she typed. "Colonel," she said over the communication link, "I've accessed their main databases. This facility isn't coordinating military operations. It's processing refugee communications." "Refugee communications?" Jake asked. "Messages from Zephyrian families trying to find each other after the war, requests for medical supplies and food, applications for reconstruction aid from the Federation. Colonel, this place is helping war survivors reconnect with their families." Jake stopped moving for a moment, letting Amy's recorded images and Nina's data sink in. The communication center at Nexus 9 wasn't a military target. It was a humanitarian facility helping a broken civilization put itself back together. "Nina," he said quietly, "start downloading everything you can find about our other targets. I want to know if they're all like this." While Nina worked, Jake and Amy continued their reconnaissance of the facility. In one section, they found a room full of Zephyrian children, too young to work, but brought to the facility because their parents had nowhere else to leave them. The children played quietly with simple toys while their parents worked to rebuild their world. Amy's voice was barely a whisper. "Colonel, if we had followed our original orders and attacked this place, we would have killed children," Jake finished, "along with their parents and everyone else here." Captain Lisa Brooks was 3 hours away from Nexus 9 when she received the message that changed everything. It came directly from Earth Command, marked with security codes she had never seen before. "Captain," Lieutenant Danny Clark said, his voice strange, "you need to read this immediately." The message was short, but devastating. "Shadow Division mission. Parameters classified beyond your clearance level. Abort search and rescue operation immediately. Return to Earth for debriefing. Do not attempt further contact with Shadow Division under any circumstances." Lisa read the message 3 times before it fully sank in. Earth Command wasn't just abandoning the Shadow Division. They were ordering her to abandon them too. "Danny," she said slowly, "send a reply. Tell Earth Command that we're too close to. Abort now. Tell them we'll have the Shadow Division in custody within 6 hours. Captain, those were direct orders." "I know what they were," Lisa snapped, "but I'm not leaving Colonel Morrison and his team to die out here, especially not when they might be operating on false intelligence." She turned to her navigation officer. "Continue course to Nexus 9, maximum speed." Back in the communication facility, Jake had seen enough. The evidence was overwhelming. Their target list was filled with civilian facilities that posed no military threat to anyone. Either the Federation had given them completely false intelligence, or their real mission had been genocide from the beginning. "We're leaving," he told Amy. "We've got what we came for." But as they moved toward the exit, Nina's voice crackled over their communicators with urgent warning. "Colonel, I'm detecting incoming ships. Multiple Federation vessels approaching the system, and they're running active scans." Jake felt his blood freeze. If Federation ships were scanning for them while they were inside a Zephyrian facility, it would look like they were conducting an attack. The timing couldn't have been worse. "How long until they're in scanning range?" he asked. 20 minutes, maybe less." Jake and Amy moved through the facility as quickly as they dared, but stealth took time. If they rushed, they might be detected by Zephyrian security. If they took too long, the Federation ships would catch them in the middle of what looked like a terrorist operation. They were almost to the exit when the facility's alarm system activated. Red lights began flashing throughout the building, and Zephyrian voices announced something in their native language. "Nina, what are they saying?" Jake demanded. "Stand by." "Okay, they're reporting Federation ships in the system. All personnel are being ordered to emergency stations in case of attack." The irony was bitter. The Zephyrians thought the Federation ships were there to attack them, when actually the Federation was trying to stop an attack that Jake had already decided not to carry out. Jake and Amy reached the ventilation system access point just as Zephyrian security teams began sweeping the facility. They climbed back into the ventilation shafts and made their way toward the exit, moving as fast as stealth would allow. Behind them, the communication center continued its work of helping war survivors find their families and rebuild their lives. The young Zephyrian workers stayed at their posts, processing messages and maintaining the networks that held their civilization together. None of them knew how close they had come to being murdered by soldiers who thought they were following legitimate military orders. As the nightfall lifted off from Nexus 9 and disappeared into space, Jake Morrison finally understood the true nature of their mission. The Shadow Division hadn't been sent to strike military targets behind enemy lines. They had been sent to finish off a defeated enemy that could no longer defend itself. The question now was what he and his team were going to do about it. The meeting took place on Titan 7, a dead moon floating in the empty space between Zephyrian and Federation territory. Captain Lisa Brooks had suggested the neutral location after finally making contact with the Shadow Division, and Colonel Jake Morrison had agreed to talk. Both sides came armed and ready for trouble, but neither wanted to start shooting. Jake stood on the moon's surface in his combat armor, looking across the barren landscape at the Federation shuttle that had landed a kilometer away. His team was spread out in defensive positions, while the nightfall hovered invisibly overhead with all weapons ready. Captain Brooks walked across the dusty ground alone, as they had agreed. She wore a standard Federation uniform with no armor, showing that she came in peace. But Jake noticed she kept her hand near her sidearm, and he didn't blame her for that. "Colonel Morrison," she said when she was close enough to talk. "I'm Captain Lisa Brooks, UFS Liberty. We need to discuss your mission parameters." "Before we discuss anything," Jake replied, "I want to know why Federation ships are hunting us. Last I checked, we were on the same side." Lisa looked at the scarred face of the man in front of her. Jake Morrison was a legend in human military circles, a soldier who had fought in conflicts across known space before Earth even joined the Federation. But now he looked tired and angry, like a man who had discovered that everything he believed in was a lie. "The war ended 8 months ago," Lisa said. "The Zephyrian Empire surrendered completely. Your mission is no longer necessary." "I figured that out when I started investigating our targets," Jake said. "What I want to know is whether the mission was ever necessary or if someone sent us out here to commit mass murder." Lisa felt her stomach clench. She had been hoping that Jake hadn't discovered the true nature of his target list. "What did you find?" "Civilian facilities," Jake said, his voice flat and cold. "Communication centers helping war refugees find their families. Industrial plants making farming equipment and medical supplies. Children's schools and hospitals. Not a single legitimate military target in the entire list." "Colonel, I think there may have been some confusion about your orders." "Don't lie to me, Captain," Jake interrupted. "I've been a soldier for 20 years. I know the difference between confusion and deliberate deception. Someone wanted the Shadow Division to arrive after the war was over and finish off the Zephyrians." "Completely." Lisa looked into Jake's eyes and saw something that frightened her. This wasn't just an angry soldier. This was a man who felt betrayed by his own command, and that made him dangerous in ways that even she couldn't fully understand. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "That depends," Jake said. "Are you here to arrest us, or to help us figure out what's really going on?" Before Lisa could answer, her communicator crackled with an urgent message from Lieutenant Danny Clark. "Captain, we're detecting multiple ships approaching the system. Zephyrian vessels moving fast." Jake's team immediately went to high alert, their weapons tracking the sky for incoming threats. But Jake himself remained focused on Lisa. "Looks like your friends found us," he said. "They're not my friends," Lisa replied. "And they probably think we're meeting here to plan an attack on their territory." High above Titan 7, Commander Vex Ka of the Zephyrian Defense Force studied the sensor readings from his flagship. 2 human ships in neutral space, 1 Federation vessel, and 1 unidentified stealth ship. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. "Communications officer," he clicked. "Open a channel to both human vessels." "This is Commander Vex Ka of the Zephyrian Defense Force," his translated voice said over the speakers of both ships. "You are ordered to surrender immediately for questioning regarding attacks on Zephyrian civilian facilities." On Titan 7's surface, Jake and Lisa looked at each other with new understanding. The Zephyrians thought they were working together, planning coordinated attacks on their worlds. "This is Captain Brooks of the UFS Liberty," Lisa responded. "We are conducting a lawful search and rescue operation under the terms of the peace treaty." "And this is Colonel Morrison," Jake added, making a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "We surrender to Federation custody." Lisa stared at him. "Colonel, what are you doing?" "Buying us time," Jake said quietly, "and making sure the Zephyrians know that we're not working together." Commander Vex Ka was confused by the humans' response. If they were planning coordinated attacks, why would one surrender to the other? And why would they do it so openly? "Captain Brooks," he said, "you will escort the surrendering vessel to Concordia Prime for questioning. Any attempt to deviate from this course will be considered an act of war." "Understood," Lisa replied. "We'll depart immediately." As the Zephyrian ships withdrew to a safe distance, Jake and Lisa finished their conversation on the moon's surface. "You realize this doesn't solve anything," Lisa said. "The Federation Council is going to want answers about your mission, and I don't think they're going to like what you tell them." "Maybe," Jake said. "But at least now we'll be able to tell our side of the story, and maybe we can find out who really sent us out here." "Colonel, there's something else you should know," Lisa said. I received orders from Earth Command to abort my search for you. They told me to return to Earth immediately and forget this ever happened. Jake felt his anger flare again. They tried to abandon us. Yes. But I chose to disobey those orders. I wasn't going to leave you and your team out here to die. For the first time since their conversation began, Jake's expression softened slightly. Thank you, Captain. That means more than you know. As they prepared to return to their respective ships, Jake had one more question. Captain, what do you think is going to happen when we get to Concordia Prime? Lisa looked up at the stars, where Federation and Zephyrian ships watched each other with barely concealed hostility. I think we're going to find out whether the Federation is truly committed to peace, or whether they're just looking for someone to blame for their war crimes. The journey to Concordia Prime took 3 days, with the nightfall following Lisa's ship under heavy escort. During that time, Jake's team prepared for what might be the most important battle of their lives, not a fight with weapons, but a fight for the truth. Lieutenant Nina Walsh worked constantly during the trip, organizing all the evidence they had collected about their mission. Every communication intercept, every facility scan, every piece of data that proved their targets had been civilian installations. Colonel, she said on the final day of their journey, I found something interesting in the mission files. The intelligence reports we were given weren't just wrong. They were deliberately falsified. How can you tell? Jake asked. The metadata doesn't match. These reports were created months after we left Earth, but they're dated to look like they came from active intelligence gathering during the war. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez looked up from cleaning her weapons. So someone was updating our target list while we were traveling, making sure we'd hit civilian targets instead of military ones. Lieutenant Chris Palmer nodded grimly. The question is who had the authority to do that, and why they wanted us to become war criminals. As Concordia Prime grew larger in their viewports, Jake realized that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of the Shadow Division, but the future of humanity's relationship with the galaxy. Someone had tried to use them as a weapon of genocide, and now they were going to find out who. The emergency session of the Federation Council was unlike anything in the organization's history. Representatives from dozens of alien species filled the Great Hall of Concordia Prime, while outside, Zephyrian and Federation fleets watched each other with weapons ready. At the center of it all, Colonel Jake Morrison and his team sat in what could only be described as the defendant's chair. Chancellor Vex led the proceedings, his pale Alteran features showing the strain of trying to hold the Federation together. This council will now hear testimony regarding the unauthorized military actions of the human unit known as the Shadow Division. Jake stood slowly, still wearing his combat uniform, but with all weapons removed. Around him, his team remained seated. Lieutenant Nina Walsh with her computers, Sergeant Amy Rodriguez with her calm soldier's composure, and Lieutenant Chris Palmer studying the alien faces that surrounded them. Before this council makes any judgments, Jake said in a clear voice that carried throughout the hall, I want to present evidence about the true nature of our mission. Colonel Morrison, interrupted Counselor Thex 9, a mantis-like creature from the Xerion Collective. You stand accused of conducting illegal military operations against civilian targets. What evidence could possibly justify such actions? Nina activated her portable computer system, and holographic displays appeared throughout the hall. The evidence she had collected over the past weeks filled the air. Intercepted communications, facility scans, mission documents, and metadata analysis. These are the intelligence reports we were given before our mission began, Jake said, pointing to one set of documents. According to these files, our targets were active military installations coordinating Zephyrian war efforts. Murmurs went through the council chamber as the aliens studied the intelligence reports. War Queen Zathra, who had been granted a seat as part of the peace negotiations, leaned forward with obvious interest. And these, Jake continued, gesturing to Nina's new displays, are the actual scans we made of those same facilities. Communication centers helping war refugees, medical supply factories, agricultural equipment manufacturers. Not a single military target in the entire list. The murmurs grew louder. Several council members began talking to their aides in rapid alien languages. Furthermore, Nina said, standing up to address the council directly, analysis of the metadata in these intelligence files shows they were created months after the Shadow Division left Earth. Someone was updating our target list during our journey, making sure we would attack civilian installations instead of military ones. Chancellor Vex's black eyes went wide. Are you suggesting that someone deliberately gave you false intelligence? I'm not suggesting it, Jake said firmly. I'm stating it as fact. Someone wanted the Shadow Division to arrive after the war was over and commit genocide against the Zephyrian population. The hall erupted in chaos. Alien voices rose in dozens of languages as council members argued among themselves. Some seemed shocked by the accusations, while others appeared to be calculating political advantages. War Queen Zathra stood up, her massive insectoid form commanding attention from everyone in the hall. If what these humans claim is true, she said in her mechanical translated voice, then someone in the Federation command structure attempted to use them as weapons of mass murder against my people. Admiral Kane, who had been sitting quietly in the Federation military section, finally spoke up. The implications of these accusations are serious. If proven true, they suggest a conspiracy at the highest levels of the Federation. Or, suggested Counselor Thex 9, they suggest that humans cannot be trusted with advanced military technology. Perhaps this entire incident demonstrates why Earth should never have been granted full Federation membership. Jake felt his anger rise, but before he could respond, Captain Lisa Brooks entered the hall. She moved quickly to the center of the chamber, carrying a datapad with urgent information. Council members, she said, I have just received communications from Earth Command that are directly relevant to these proceedings. She activated her datapad, and new displays appeared in the hall. This time, the evidence was even more damning. Communication logs showing discussions about cleanup operations and post-war asset management. These messages, Lisa continued, show that certain elements within Earth Command were aware that the Shadow Division would arrive after the war ended. They planned to use Colonel Morrison's team to eliminate what they called potential future threats among the Zephyrian population. The hall went completely silent. Even the constant background hum of alien breathing and mechanical life support systems seemed to stop. Jake stared at the communications logs, reading the cold, clinical language that described the planned extermination of millions of Zephyrian civilians. Names he recognized, commanders he had served under, discussing genocide like it was a routine military operation. "Who authorized this?" Chancellor Vex asked quietly. Lisa looked uncomfortable. The messages were sent under the authority of General Harrison Webb, commander of Earth Defense Forces. Jake felt like he had been punched in the stomach. General Webb had been his mentor, the man who had recommended him for the Shadow Division program. Now he was learning that Webb had planned to use him as a weapon of genocide. "There's more," Lisa said. "General Webb is currently en route to Concordia Prime aboard the Earth battleship Washington. He should arrive within 6 hours. War Queen Zathra's compound eyes focused on Jake with new intensity. "Colonel Morrison, you and your team chose not to attack our civilian facilities, even when you believed you were following legitimate military orders. Why?" Jake thought about his answer carefully. "Because we're soldiers, not murderers. When we saw that our targets were civilians trying to rebuild their lives, we couldn't bring ourselves to kill them. Even though you believed your own command had ordered those attacks, even then, some things are more important than following orders." Amy stood up beside Jake. "Your Majesty, if I may speak, my team and I have spent years fighting to protect innocent people. We couldn't become the monsters we were trained to fight against." Chris nodded agreement. "The intelligence was wrong, the mission was based on lies, and the targets were innocent. We chose to be human beings instead of weapons." Nina added her voice to the others. "We could have followed our orders blindly and killed thousands of civilians. Instead, we investigated, we gathered evidence, and we chose to do what was right." War Queen Zathra looked at each member of the Shadow Division for a long moment. Then she turned to address the full council. "These humans were sent to murder my people," she said. "They were given false intelligence, experimental weapons, and orders to commit genocide. But when they discovered the truth, they chose mercy over orders, conscience over duty." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I have fought against human forces for 3 years. I have seen their capabilities in battle, and I know they are among the most formidable warriors in the galaxy. But today, I have learned something more important. They are also capable of honor, even when their own leaders are not." Chancellor Vex stood up slowly. "This council will recess until General Webb arrives. At that time, we will hear his testimony and determine the full scope of this conspiracy." As the council members filed out of the hall, Jake and his team remained in their seats, surrounded by Federation security guards. They had presented their evidence and told their story. Now they could only wait to see whether the galaxy would judge them as heroes or criminals. Outside the hall, Lisa Brooks stood with Admiral Kane, both of them watching the Zephyrian fleet through the station's windows. "Admiral," Lisa said quietly, "what's going to happen to them?" Kane shook his head. "I don't know, Captain, but I can tell you this. If General Webb really did what these communications suggest, then the Shadow Division may be the only honest soldiers left in this entire mess. General Harrison Webb arrived at Concordia Prime 6 hours later aboard the Earth battleship Washington, the most powerful warship in the human fleet. He came expecting to find the Shadow Division in custody for war crimes, and instead walked into the biggest political crisis in Federation history. Webb was a tall man with gray hair and cold blue eyes that had seen decades of military service. He wore his dress uniform with perfect precision, every medal and ribbon in exactly the right place. As he entered the council hall, he projected the confidence of a man who believed he was completely in control of the situation. "Council members," he said as he took his position at the speaker's platform, "I apologize for the actions of the rogue unit under my command. Colonel Morrison and his team clearly exceeded their authority and should be punished accordingly." Chancellor Vex studied the human general with his black Altaran eyes. "General Webb, before we discuss punishment, we need to discuss the intelligence, reports that were provided to the Shadow Division. Standard military intelligence, gathered during active combat operations," Webb replied smoothly. "Unfortunately, it appears the information was outdated by the time Colonel Morrison's team reached their target area." Jake Morrison stood up from his seat in the defendant's section. "That's a lie, General, and you know it." Webb turned to look at his former protege with an expression of disappointed authority. "Colonel Morrison, you are out of line. You will remain silent while the adults handle this situation." "No," Jake said firmly. "I won't remain silent while you try to cover up your war crimes." Nina Walsh activated her computer system, filling the hall with holographic displays of the intelligence metadata. "General Webb, these files show that the intelligence reports were created months after the Shadow Division left Earth. The timestamps have been falsified, but the underlying data structure reveals when they were actually made." Webb's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "Technical speculation from a subordinate officer. Hardly admissible evidence." "Then perhaps you'd like to explain these," Captain Lisa Brooks said, standing up and activating her own data displays. The communication logs she had discovered showed clearly that Webb had known about the planned genocide. The hall went silent as council members read the messages. Webb's own words, discussing the elimination of potential future threats among the Zephyrian population. Plans to use the Shadow Division as an untraceable asset for post-war cleanup operations. War Queen Zathra rose from her seat, her massive form casting shadows across the hall. "General Webb, these communications show that you plan to use human soldiers to murder Zephyrian civilians after the war had ended. How do you explain this?" Webb's mask of control finally slipped. "Your Majesty, you must understand the strategic situation. The Zephyrian Empire was defeated, but not destroyed. Given time, you could rebuild and threaten the Federation again. The Shadow Division was sent to prevent that possibility." The admission sent shock waves through the hall. Several alien council members began talking rapidly among themselves, while others simply stared at Webb in horror. "So you admit it," Chancellor Vex said quietly. "You sent human soldiers to commit genocide against a defeated enemy." "I sent soldiers to eliminate a future threat," Webb corrected. "The methods were perhaps harsh, but necessary for long-term peace. Jake stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "General, you sent us to murder children. We found kids in those facilities, playing while their parents tried to rebuild their civilization. You wanted us to kill them all. Casualties of war, Colonel. Sometimes hard decisions must be made." Amy Rodriguez stood up beside Jake. "We're soldiers, not executioners. We swore an oath to protect innocent people, not slaughter them." "Chris," Palmer added his voice. "The war was over, General. The Zephyrians had surrendered completely. What you planned wasn't military strategy, it was genocide." Nina Walsh's fingers flew over her keyboard as she accessed more files. "General, I'm also finding evidence that you planned to abandon the Shadow Division after they completed their mission. You never intended for us to return to Federation space." Webb shrugged. "Expendable assets serve their purpose and are discarded. That's how military operations work." The cold admission finally broke something in Jake Morrison. 20 years of military service, 20 years of following orders and trusting his superiors, and now he learned that his own commander had planned to use him as a weapon of genocide and then abandon him to die. "You bastard," Jake said, taking a step toward Webb. "We trusted you. We followed you across the galaxy because we believed you were sending us to protect humanity." Federation security guards moved to restrain Jake, but War Queen Zathra's voice stopped them. "Let him speak. I want to hear what these human soldiers have to say." Jake looked around the hall at the faces watching him. Aliens who had fought against humanity for years, now listening to learn what humans were really like when their leaders stripped away all pretense. "We are not General Webb," Jake said clearly. "When we discovered that our targets were civilian facilities, we chose not to attack them. When we learned that our intelligence was false, we chose to investigate rather than kill blindly. When we realized that our own command had betrayed us, we chose to tell the truth rather than cover it up." Amy stepped up beside him. "The Shadow Division was created to be humanity's ultimate weapon, but we refuse to be anyone's tool for genocide." Chris nodded agreement. "We're soldiers, but we're also human beings. We have consciences, and we chose to follow them instead of following orders." Nina added, "We could have destroyed those facilities and killed thousands of innocent people. Instead, we gathered evidence and chose to expose the truth." War Queen Zathra looked at the four humans standing together in defiance of their own command structure. These were the same soldiers who had terrorized Zephyrian forces during the war, the most dangerous fighters humanity had ever produced. But now they stood before her speaking of conscience and mercy. "General Webb," she said, turning back to the human commander, "you sent these soldiers to murder my people, but they chose honor over orders, mercy over duty. They are better humans than you are." Chancellor Vex stood up to address the full council. "General Harrison Webb, you are hereby stripped of all authority and will be held for trial on charges of conspiracy to commit genocide." The Shadow Division, having refused to participate in war crimes and having exposed this conspiracy, is hereby granted full pardons for any actions taken during their mission. Webb's face went red with anger. "You can't do this. I am a general in the Earth Defense Forces." "Not anymore," Admiral Kane said, standing up in the Federation military section. "As of this moment, You are relieved of all command and expelled from Federation service. War Queen Zathra stepped down from her platform and walked over to where Jake and his team stood. The massive insectoid warrior looked down at the 4 humans who had refused to become genocidal weapons. "Colonel Morrison," she said, "you and your soldiers chose mercy when you could have chosen murder. You chose truth when you could have chosen lies. On behalf of the Zephyrian people, I thank you." She extended one of her 4 arms toward Jake. After a moment's hesitation, he reached out and shook her clawed hand. "Your Majesty," Jake said, "we're sorry for the pain our species has caused yours. You are not responsible for the actions of General Webb," Zathra replied. "You are only responsible for your own choices, and you chose well." Chancellor Vex called for order in the hall. "This council hereby establishes new protocols for human military operations within Federation space. The Shadow Division will be granted autonomous status, operating under Federation oversight but independent of Earth Command. Furthermore," he continued, "Captain Lisa Brooks is promoted to Admiral and given command of a new human fleet that will operate as an equal partner within the Federation structure." Lisa stood up, looking stunned by the promotion. "Chancellor, I'm honored, but—" "Admiral Brooks," Vex interrupted, "you chose to disobey orders from your own command in order to save the lives of your fellow humans and prevent a diplomatic crisis. The Federation needs more officers who put conscience above convenience." As the session ended, Jake Morrison looked around the hall one more time. The war that had torn the galaxy apart was truly over now, but something new was beginning. Humanity had proven that they could be trusted with power because they had chosen not to abuse it. Outside the station, the Zephyrian fleet began to withdraw, no longer seeing the Federation as a threat. War Queen Zathra had found allies she could. Respect among the humans, soldiers who chose honor over orders. The Shadow Division would continue to serve, but now they served ideals rather than commanders who might betray those ideals. They had arrived at the end of a war, believing they were humanity's last hope for survival. Instead, they had become humanity's first representatives in a galaxy that was learning to trust them. The war had ended months ago with the signing of treaties and the surrender of armies. But it truly ended now, with 4 soldiers choosing mercy over murder and proving that some things were more important than following orders. Jake Morrison and his team had been sent to finish a war with genocide. Instead, they had ended it with honor.